Welcome everyone, this is Axum here from Fire Emblem. I'm joined today by a very special guest. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
I am JonoabboFE. I do a ton of Fire Emblem stuff over on my channel, like analysis, tier lists, gameplay, pretty much anything that fits in that sort of bracket, but yeah, you'll find basically anything over there, and I'm very glad to be here today to talk through some Fire Emblem moments.
We're going to put your stuff down in the comments in the link below. Have a good time checking out his channel. It's absolutely fantastic. I love all of his content. Today our video is going to be about the top 10 darkest moments in Fire Emblem history. Honestly, whenever you look at a moment that you're like, damn, that was messed up.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a list of 10 along with some honorable mentions planned out, and we can just run through them all. So, in our number 10 spot, we have got the end of Gen 1 of Fire Emblem 4 Genealogy of the Holy War, the deaths of the majority of the Gen 1 cast.
Probably one of the most brutal and gut-wrenching points of plot in any game we've ever played before.
Yeah, I think when most people think of something like a dark moment in Fire Emblem, this would probably be one of the first things that comes to mind, and it might be a surprise to a lot of people that this is at number 10 on the list, and not somewhere higher up.
I think it's one of those scenes that you're just like caught off guard and you're absolutely impressed by the devastation that occurs with very little warning, to be frank. There's like kind of some foreshadowing to it, but not enough that you would be like, okay, this is where we're going with this plot.
It's one of those things that it just kind of hits you out of nowhere in a sense, and you know that there's still a lot of game left to go, but your entire party is dead, including your lord.
Do you think that part of the reason that people really feel that this is really dark is because of the loss of Sigurd? Like, you know, you've kind of invested emotionally into this character, you've kind of followed his struggles through this point. Deirdre is gone, like you got all these things that kind of didn't work out in his favor, and when you finally have that glimmer of hope that you've succeeded, you kind of don't. You know what I mean? Which makes it so bleak.
Yeah, I think part of it definitely comes down to the investment you've got in Sigurd, as well as the other characters that are a part of this roster who you will have been using throughout. It feels weird to say 6 chapters, but it's 6 Genealogy of the Holy War chapters, so that's a long time. And it's also the fact that this is one of the only times in Fire Emblem where you actually don't achieve your goal. Abruptly
put to an end, and kind of mercilessly too. When you think about it, Sigurd was brutally incinerated by Valflame. That's pretty dark, bro.
But the reason why we've got it down at number 10 is because it's more of an impactful event. It's probably one of the most impactful individual events on this entire list, if not in the franchise as a whole. But the actual darkness of it is overshadowed by some of the events that we've got highed up. While it is very memorable, very high impact, it's not overly dark in comparison to some of the other things on here. In isolation, it's just killed your entire playable cast.
At number 9, we have Berku sacrifices Rinea to Duma. The reason why this to me has a bigger impact into the story of Shadows of Valentia than the Generation 1 death is because this man is all about pride from the beginning to the end. His only goal is to basically succeed Rudolph, but what happens is he eventually finds out that Alm is the true hero, which drives him to madness, in which he sacrifices the one person that actually loved him unconditionally. It is an absolutely brutal moment in the history of Fire Emblem, in which the desire of one very arrogant, prideful individual ruins a completely beautiful scenario that could have happened, which is Rinea would have loved him unconditionally, and despite the pleas, she still is sacrificed to Duma, and you're forced to put her and Berkut down as the monstrous transformations that they have become. At number 8, we have Nino, everybody's favorite Black Fang est.
With regards to Nino, this is mainly revolving around her treatment by Sonia, her foster mother, and the role she's made to play in the Black Fang.
I think part of what's so brutal about this is that, first of all, her family, her real family, is murdered by Sonia. She's taken in to be used basically as a puppet, but there's no real goal for Sonia to taking her in besides the fact that Nurgle said, like, just drag her along because maybe she'll be useful later. And she's constantly trying to strive for that attention to make sure that Sonia kind of loves her, to have that motherly-daughterly bond, but she just miserably fails because Sonia is incapable of any emotions whatsoever.
Very much the fact as well that she's used as almost a tool by Sonia, despite the fact that she does develop like pretty solid relationships with other members of the Black Fang. Even that can't keep her out of like Sonia's abuse, essentially.
It also kind of is bittersweet, the fact that she does actually develop relationship with other Black Fang members such as Lloyd, Linus, and Brendan, but she's forced to put them down because she's on the opposite army to make matters even worse, they're later resurrected on, and she has to kill them again.
Yeah, and I think another thing that really stands out with Nino, and again, perhaps a couple of others that might come up in the future, is that Nino is one of the most almost innocent characters in not just Fire Emblem 7, but perhaps the series, because even when she's fighting Sonya, she still doesn't want to kill her despite everything. And it's obviously bad whenever this situation is put onto any character, but when it's a character like Nino, I think it stands out a lot more as to how dark it really is.
At number 7, we have Michaelas and Maria. I really think Michaelas is super cool. Like, he's super stylish. What a pre-promote in Mystery of the Emblem. But man, is this dude a scumbag.
It seems weird to have it this high in a way, like above the Gen 1 deaths and things like that, but I think given the actions of what happens, it kind of has to be.
I want you to imagine for a second that you wake up one day and you decide that your father is no longer going to be the leader of the household. So you just Game of Thrones kill him. Then you take your youngest sister, who at this point in time is about 4 years old. You hand her over to a bunch of other dragons in some other country, in which they imprison her in a castle for about 6 to 7 years with no contact to anybody else that she knew. If that's not brutal, I can't imagine what is. And the fact that all of this is done to prevent your other sister from whooping your makes it even worse. It's like, bro, couldn't you have just talked this out at some point in time?
Have we touched on the fact yet that Michaelas murdered his own father in the process? Like,
yeah, it's like...
It's just such a situation in a way, like there's just so much going on here. So at number 6, we have the corrupted in Fire Emblem Engage, the resurrection and killing of family members that occurs multiple times throughout the plot.
One of the strongest moments in the game that has this is probably when you first see Morion. That's probably one of the best bits of voice acting that I've seen in that game. It really felt emotional and real the way he talks to his father, right? And this plot just keeps happening over and over again. And to some degree, this happened in Fates, but not as bad as it was in this one.
Yeah, it happens multiple times in Engage, and it's the characters it keeps happening to as well. We obviously get this with Morion affecting Diamant and Ulchrist. We get this with Lumera affecting the protagonist, Aaliyah, and then we get it with Hyacinth.
I don't know if you guys know, but when Vale resurrects a corrupted, she has to actually touch it. And since Hyacinth was like swallowed whole, I want you to imagine that Anaconda film from a long time ago, because he must have been spit out in order for him to revive him, which makes this whole thing a lot darker.
Yeah, it really does. Like, all of these are bad, but I think that one especially has just an extra, almost gross factor to it. It's just very disturbing. Especially in the situation of, like, Aaliyah having to fight Lumera after only having just reconnected with her in the first place. You can only imagine the toll that's taking on the characters themselves, and then they have to carry on fighting the war afterwards. Like, there's no time to mourn or grieve here. So at number 5, we have Orson in Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones and the resurrection of his wife. It feels weird for it to be this high again because it's a single character as opposed to the last entry, which was 3, but this one's disturbing.
Probably one of the most disturbing scenes in any Fire Emblem. The way it's conveyed on the GBA screen is also very impressive for a handheld game. I think the way that it was written is really how it's so impressive.
Incredible how well this sticks with you, considering, like you say, there's no voice acting, there's pretty much just a still portrait. But that one scene with Orson's wife, the darling scene, it's something that stays with you. You don't forget that one quickly.
Orson was willing to sacrifice his whole life, basically his whole beliefs, his whole system of beliefs for his wife, which is like, fine, that's cool, I get it. But to have a resurrected, like, zombie version, because I don't know about you, but my mind went to the worst place. Like, I imagined, like, eyeball popping out of the socket type deal here, and him still being like, oh, she's beautiful, and I'm like, bro, she's dead.
Yeah, and I think one of the closing lines of that scene is Ephraim saying that he thinks Orson was happy, which, if anything, only makes it darker.
At number 4, we have Just Tailchew, the story of a cheerful little girl from Generation 1 who takes a brutally dark turn.
Yeah, the Tailchew situation is another one which it seems odd to have so high until you look at the character her situation applies to.
Every time you see her with Claude in the first generation, she's just like got this upbeat personality, and you eventually think that she dies in Generation 1. But then you figure out she doesn't.
She's basically subjective to a remaining life of abuse. forced to do so to protect Tyne. And it's a really dark path for Fire Emblem to take, with a character that's just, like you say, so cheerful and bubbly on their introduction.
There's a lot of mentions on the suffering that she goes through, including physical abuse, mental abuse, how basically Hilda just treats her like absolute garbage and trash.
Just really dark, which I understand is the point of the list, but this is the one that really sticks out to me as like very unnecessary, in the sense that this wasn't done to further a war effort, or this wasn't done for characters to achieve their goals. This was just done because it could be done.
And it's not for 1 year, for 2 years, it's for the entirety between Generation 1 up until her death.
You don't really get a sense of closure even after Tailtoo's death.
I gotta say, at number 3, it's Gritnia Tower. Gritnia Tower is an event in Path of Radiance that has to do with the creation of the Feral Lagoos.
But also Leanne's captivity, it's where she's held prisoner. This one is definitely a case where the volume of it is what makes it really stand out. The amount of characters this affects is more so the focal point rather than the specifics of who, I feel.
Definitely. It's an event that basically affects any and all Lagoos that were captured by Ashnard and subjected to the experimentations of Izuka, which were absolutely brutal. Imagine you as a person being force-fed a drug to remove your agency, shorten your lifespan, and transform you into a beast that only does combat. That's exactly what this was.
And I think it's made like all the worse that the character who this is done by, Izuka, is then brought in initially as an ally in Radiant Dawn, which is very jarring.
Extra aggravating that Izuka never truly feels the punishment for what he did. Like, it's almost like he gets away scot-free at multiple points in time because he thinks the Lagoos are so inferior to the Bjork that he's just like, it doesn't matter what I do to them.
It's so hard to see where Izuka finds any sense that this is an okay thing to do, because he doesn't even seem like he feels what he's doing is wrong.
I don't know about you, but the thing that stuck out to me the most was when they later on go into the tunnels or the dungeons that they have, and they describe the scene. You don't see anything. Again, this is like almost like the Orson situation. You don't see anything, but the way they describe it is just rank and filled with the dead, and at that one point, every creature that was there was a Lagoos.
Yeah, I think we get a lot of characters in Fire Emblem who are doing evil, but they're accepting of it. Or we get the characters who are justified in what they do, even though it might be wrong, they feel it's necessary. Izuka is one of the rare examples of somebody who is doing just unspeakable things and doesn't even seem to recognize that it's bad. He's not relishing in the evil he's doing, he's just doing it. And that's somehow more twisted to me. So at number 2, we have Lobsters Cult in Fire Emblem 4 Genealogy of the Holy War. Now, for these top 2, we did have to merge a lot together into the parties who did what they did. And this was mainly to just stop the list being entirely filled with Fire Emblem 4 and the final entry.
Lobsters Cult is basically a combination of multiple events that occurred throughout the game of Genealogy. Right off the bat, I'm just going to bring up one of them, which is Child Hunts, which should put it at top 2. Just that one sentence right there.
Incredibly messed up, and similar to the Tailtoo thing, it almost feels like these were put in here just as a showcase of evil.
And not only that, it's actually a reoccurring theme that you also see in Thracia. So like Thracia also has mentions of this too. It's mostly because of Julius, and as we all know, Julius used to be a good person, or a good boy at least, until he was corrupted by the dragon, in effect of Lobsters Cult, and it's just like, there's so many things that compile on top of this.
Yeah, and that's only getting onto the Child Hunts. Of course, we've got the brainwashing of Deirdre on there, and just because it's it's not their first introduction in the story, of course, but it's the one where it really affects you. I think that's where we start to see, like, okay, these guys don't actually have limits. They are just willing to do anything.
Even Veld's participation in Thracia also has to do with this. This is all a mastermind plan. Arvis's manipulation, everything, every single step of the way is always backed by Lobsters Cult. So they just want to revive this dark god. They do not care about what ends or means they will use to achieve this.
It all ties into it, and I think that's why it's fair to include this as its own entry, because separating these events from each other becomes quite messy in a way, because they are all just tied together by Lobsters Cult.
Before we unveil number 1, we're going to go into the honorable mentions that were very, very good but didn't quite meet the list for a couple of reasons.
So we're starting off with Marianne's situation in Fire Emblem Three Houses. If Marianne is not a part of Violet's party, she never appears in Part 2 of the game, and it's highly implied that the reason behind this is that she's committed suicide. I think we need these things to be locked in to be on here, and I don't think we can confirm that this is actually something that happens. If it is, it probably would make the list.
In a similar vein, we have Lucius and the Orphanage. This is from Fire Emblem 6, The Binding Blade.
Yeah, Lucius is obviously the character from Fire Emblem 7 in the Blazing Blade who is not present in Fire Emblem 6, and it leaves people asking what happened in the time between the two games.
It is basically speculated that Lucius ran the orphanage that Ray and Lou were from, the children of Nino. That when Byrne attacked, they brutally murder the caretaker of the orphanage, which in this case is believed to be Lucius.
The only reason why this isn't on the top list is because it's not confirmed to have happened.
From Fire Emblem Engage and also Awakening, everyone everywhere is dead. In these two entries, everybody in the future is dead. Literally everyone. Only the cast that you play with is the cast that is still alive, basically fighting for a world that has no possible good outcome.
Again, the reason we don't have this one on there is the lack of impact it necessarily has on the player and the characters they're familiar with.
Even though the outcome is bleak, the idea behind a doomed world has kind of been slammed and hammered over and over again, which is dark, but it's not nearly as personal.
Yeah, I think the fact as well that these are alternate timelines or alternate worlds really hinders the impact it has on the player in terms of how dark it is, because there is still a world there that isn't affected by these events. And our final honourable mention is Count Varley, the father of Bernadetta in Fire Emblem Three Houses and Fire Emblem Three Hopes. He makes his appearance in the latter game, and after everything we've heard about him up until that point, he isn't the kind of character you would expect.
If there was a tier list for how bad dads are, this guy would probably be in the top 3.
Yeah, and I think what really makes this one stand out over others is how normal he seems when you actually talk to him in the game. He seems almost charismatic, and I think he can even start to win the player over until you remember who this person is.
At number 1, from Fire Emblem Three Houses and Three Hopes, the Agarthans.
For this one, we've had to conglomerate a lot of actions into one entry because this would have taken up a lot of the list otherwise. There are a lot of messed up things on here.
If we start numbering them, we have body snatching, child experiments, the tragedy of Dusker, ritual member sacrifice, and the creation of the hero relics.
One that really stands out to me is Lysithia's treatment. So, Lysithia's backstory is that basically she and her siblings were subjected to experiments to try to have 2 crests put into them, and all of her siblings died as a result, and although Lysithia survived and did get 2 crests, she has a significantly shortened lifespan.
In the same vein, Edelgard also reveals to you that she underwent the same type of experimentation, allowing her to have 2 crests as well. In her case, it's even a little worse because she's forced later on to work with the abuser.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you don't even get any redemption of that as a part of Edelgard's story in Three Houses, it's included as part of the end cutscene, arguably adds to that even more. There's no catharsis at the end of this.
On the list of things they did, there's also responsible for the tragedy of Dusker, which in this case, Dimitri's whole royal family were killed. Now, you could argue that this is just another Game of Thrones plot, but the brutality of which the people suffer at the tragedy of Dusker, including the complete genocide of the Duskurian people, is pretty messed up.
Yeah, and if you go through the playable cast of Three Houses, I think the amount of characters that this directly impacts is quite astounding, really. Obviously, you've got Dimitri and Edelgard, Dedue, of course. Felix loses his brother, Ingrid loses the person she's betrothed to, and it just keeps going.
But it doesn't stop there. We still have the body snatching and the ritual member sacrifice. Kronya murdered a girl to take her spot and then joins your army as that person. So does Tomas. So does Tails. All of these guys just basically impersonate other people that they brutally murder. To those of you that don't know, the Sword of the Creator is actually Sothis' spine. And the reason this is the case is because Nemesis went, at the behest of the Agarthans, killed her while she was in slumber, and then fashioned the hero relics off of her corpse. This is the same thing that is done with every other hero relic in the game. So every time you're wielding a hero relic, you're actually wielding the dead corpse of a Nabatean, which kind of shows you why Rhea would be so mad in the first place.
So yeah, that only kind of makes things worse because you come to rely on these relics and they actually end up being very powerful tools, and I think it almost adds to the darkness that they were successful in a way.
The remaining surviving Nabateans have to deal with the fact that those are the reminders of their brethren forever.
Yeah, and there are so many other things with the Agarthans that we haven't even touched on. The Javelins of Light spring to mind, as well as the treatment of a character like Happy, who is also heavily impacted by Cornelia in particular. Really messed up. Like, any one of these entries on their own could potentially be this high on the list. The fact that all of them combine, it has to mean that they're in this spot. So with that at number 1, that wraps up our list of the darkest moments in the Fire Emblem franchise.
I really hope you guys liked it. Thank you so much, Jono, for coming on board as well and helping me out with this. I had a blast. I think it was a lot of fun. Please go and check out Jono's channel as well. It's absolutely fantastic. I'm telling you, his stuff is golden.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
If you guys agree with this list, please leave down any comment you have below. If you don't agree with it, also leave any comment. And we'll be seeing you guys next time. Have a wonderful day.